This is your Interstate on the Interstate.
Hi, welcome back to your Interstate on the Interstate. Today we're talking about projection part 2. Today we're going to talk about some more tools that you can use to be able to use projection. And we're going to talk about what to do when someone is projecting onto you. Starting with that topic of what do you do when someone else is projecting onto you? And this is common. I had mentioned this in the previous episode that I've found in different spiritual communities, you just overhear different people saying like, you're projecting. It comes up where people talk about how other people project onto them and it causes distress. Honestly, this happens in a lot of spiritual communities, but also just in daily life. We perceive that it's somebody else doing something to us, or that we perceive that they're doing something and we're judging it, especially in this time where the topics of racism and politics are getting really heated, where everyone is pointing fingers. And that's projection. It's projection if it's causing you any sort of upset, and if you're perceiving that it's something or somebody outside of you that is making you feel that way. It doesn't mean that that's not happening. It doesn't mean that somebody else didn't do something or say something. But the point is that we have the ability to be able to bring it back to ourselves. And in that sense, then we're not the victim and we can actually transcend and release all of the upset that we're holding on to. We also have to accept that no individual on earth only gets positive feedback. Think of all the people that you admire. Someone always has something negative to say about them. Part of mastery is being able to not take what other people say personally. Just recognize that what other people are saying about you, both positive and negative, is just information. It's just data. It doesn't mean to shut yourself off from what other people are saying. It doesn't mean don't take compliments, but just to be able to come from a place where you're not dependent on how other people perceive you. And so it doesn't mean to shut yourself off from what people are saying, but to be able to see a couple of steps back, that it's not about you, both the positive and the negative. A lot of people get caught up in the idea that everything should be positive, but that's ridiculous. That's in this dualistic world, it's not possible for everything to be positive. It's about being in a state of mind where you're not fazed by the negative, but at the same time, you're also not swayed by the positive too, where you can find that stillness, that inner stillness, no matter what is happening, no matter what someone is saying or doing to you, about you. So I want to share a little story where I was traveling back in 2010. It was after the life-changing retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh, which I had talked about in a previous episode, where I really started opening up and getting in touch with the impersonal self, the whole, the big I, as I've been calling it in this series. And I became acutely aware that if I stayed really present, I became a perfect mirror for everyone around me. And at the time, I had a photography project, which was called 100 Smiles, and where I brought a mat board frame and I brought it to different places in the world and asked to take photos of people holding the frame. One guy I photographed was in Prague. I just asked to take a photo of him, but he didn't speak hardly any English, but he wanted to say something to me, and I couldn't quite understand exactly what he was saying. So he called his friend to come over. Apparently, he was a portrait artist and he spent his days drawing portraits of people and selling them. So we were sitting at the cafe and he was just so full of life and passion, and he was drawing my eyes, and in that moment, his eyes filled with tears. He said through the translator that my eyes were just so beautiful that he couldn't contain the emotion. He said that he saw in my eyes that I could really see people. I was doing my best to be in a state of zero, of being just completely present without imposing anything on others. And I realized that what he saw in me through my eyes was really him being able to see his eyes for the first time, probably in his life, because that's what he does for a living, day in and day out. He looks at people, he looks into their eyes, into their souls, and pencil to paper does his best to depict it. So all the things that he said about me was really about himself, his beautiful eyes. It was his ability to be able to see the beauty in others. But, it works, projection and reflection works both ways, right? If I'm witnessing somebody telling me that I have beautiful eyes and that I can see the beauty in others, well, guess what? That's me too. That's him and that's me. It's through other people. It's through our interactions and our relationships. That's how we see ourselves. Not long after that, I was in Egypt, and I was in this tiny little oasis town called Siwa. I was at a restaurant with a few friends. There was a guy who he just offered me a pill. It was like this big red pill. To this day, I have no idea what kind of pill that was, but I said no. And I was talking with the people that I was with that I was really amazed at how beautiful the textiles were of that town, and that I was interested in purchasing some. And that guy said that he had some in his apartment and suggested that I go with him. And I just said no. And I just sat there, and I was looking at him with just that same state of just openness and presence. And in my mind, I was judging him. I was thinking, oh my gosh, this guy is trying to drug people, drug me, drug like foreign people that might be vulnerable. He wants to take women to his apartment to take advantage of them. I had all of these thoughts in my head, even though, this period of time I was really practicing being very present. But to be honest, I had those thoughts, and I was just looking at him, and he just started to say all these things about me. All the things that I had thought in my head about him, he just basically started to say out loud and say that was me. And as he was saying those things, I was able to not take it personal and know that whatever he was saying was just the information. It was just the information that was being passed through him, through me in that moment, just seeing it, just witnessing it. For a moment, it felt a little uncomfortable. I hadn't really had anyone say anything negative to me, not to my face. But, I was able to be there as a witness. And eventually, I just stayed. I stayed with that. And until I could see him in truth, in innocence. It's not easy to not take it personal. It takes practice. It takes training. But every time, every moment that you can sit with it and clear your mind, free yourself, free your mind from the judgment, that clears lifetimes of having to deny that aspect of self. Both of those situations were projections, positive and negative, and I learned a lot from witnessing that. I'm not saying that I always hold this awareness, but I do notice that the more time that I spend in being mindful, watching my own judgments in my mind, the easier it gets to see that projection is always reflecting some aspect of me, but that information that's being reflected isn't personal. It's just the data that we carry in our systems, in our subconscious mind. I find it interesting that another way that I've seen that people project onto me their perceptions of me is the range of ethnicity, the range of age that people think that I am, and so many assumptions that people make just by looking at me. There were times where I took offense, but again, I've just learned to not take it personally, that it's more of a reflection of wherever they are at or whoever they've been exposed to, whatever information they have. I'm just reflecting that. In summary, people see what they want to see, but whatever I hear, whatever I see, it's always up to me to be in that state of zero, to take responsibility for what is projected onto me by clearing my mind. Not holding on to judgment, not trying to defend, not trying to convince, not trying to change anyone else. Often we react. Our reactions are trying to defend or tell somebody that they're wrong, or trying to convince them of that what they're saying isn't true. And I found that it actually takes a lot less energy to just fully listen to somebody, even if you don't agree with them, to just sit and listen. Just deep listening, just really opening up and just hearing what a person has to say and taking responsibility for everything that you're listening to. That can be so much more healing than trying to convince somebody using logic. All in all, I think it's really so important to just recognize that all of the projections that do come into our awareness are an opportunity to clear that. And we have an opportunity to take consciousness of some aspect of ourselves that we might not be aware of. And I mean, everything that we witness, if we choose to watch the news and mainstream media, sometimes I use that as a healing tool. I'll watch it. You know, it's not about agreeing with whatever I'm witnessing or hearing or not, but it's about sitting there and seeing it and feeling it and then clearing it. With every conversation that I have, with every interaction, those are all opportunities to recognize and to see ourselves and not to perceive it as other. So the next thing we're going to talk about is separating fact from interpretation. No one can be angry at a fact. This actually comes from the Manual of A Course in Miracles, so I'm just going to read the quote. It says, "Perhaps it will be helpful to remember that no one can be angry at a fact. It is always an interpretation that gives rise to negative emotions, regardless of their seeming justification by what appears as facts." That's quite loaded there. So what does that really mean is that there are layers. There's what happened, and then there's our interpretation of what happened. What we get upset about, what we get angry about, is the interpretation. It's not the fact in itself. To me, one helpful tool that you can use is if you feel overwhelmed with anger or upset or any emotion in any moment, to just take a step back and separate the fact from interpretation. I remember hearing a long time ago about a therapy that was used for people with PTSD, with post-traumatic stress disorder. What they would do is have the patient tell the story, but they would have the patient tell the story over and over again until it lost the meaning. And in my understanding, that style of therapy was basically getting down to associating the person with just the facts and not the interpretation. And so the next time that you come across a situation that makes you upset, it can be helpful to start to parse out fact from interpretation. Let's say you're annoyed at your neighbor for doing construction super early because it interrupts your sleep and makes you grumpy. Maybe that's happened to me before. So the tangible data here is that your neighbor does construction at 6 a.m. And there's no emotion attached to that information. Your neighbor does construction at 6 a.m. Period. When you get to the loud noise makes me feel upset, that's when you see that that's interpretation. They are inconsiderate for doing construction so early. That's interpretation. That's where you start adding your own interpretation of what's right and wrong. And when you think that what happened should have been different, they didn't think of me, it's interrupting my sleep. They did something wrong. All of that is interpretation. They should have done this. They should have done that. Interpretation. And so the next time that you do feel upset, just try separating fact and interpretation and to stay focused more on the fact. The next thing that I want to talk about is about Byron Katie's The Work. This, to me, has been one of the most useful tools when I found myself just so stuck in whatever situation was making me upset at that point in time. Just asking these questions, which is part of the work, has helped me to kind of unlock or not be so tightly wound up in my interpretations. In summary, she talks about 4 questions that you ask yourself when you're in a situation that makes you upset. So yeah, let's just use that same example of my neighbor did construction at 6 a.m. and he was inconsiderate and it woke me up and it interrupted my sleep and it made me grumpy. It's a lot there. So step 1 is it true? Well, it's true that they did construction at 6 a.m., but is it true that they were inconsiderate and all of that I had said before? If I'm really upset, I would probably say, yeah, it's true. Step 2, can you absolutely know that it's true? Well, that's where it starts to loosen up a little bit because absolute's pretty absolute. And what is really true? When you ask that question, can you absolutely know that it's true? For me, it just kind of like relaxes the tightness of that grip that I have about what happened and about my interpretation. Because truthfully, some part of me knows that it's interpretation and that it's not really true, but I'm really upset about something else. And so, step 3, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? And so if I think about that situation of, oh, he's inconsiderate and the loud noise interrupts my sleep and I'm grumpy. It makes me feel tense. It makes me feel upset. I don't feel good. And then step 4, who would you be without the thought? And that question to me, it takes you more to that state of the big I. Sometimes we're so identified with this is what happened to me that we think that that's who we are. And that if we let go of that, the story of what happened, the interpretation of what happened, then who would we be? And yeah, to me, it takes me to a state of peace, of quiet. That's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Byron Katie's work. And there is a more in-depth worksheet and information that I'm going to post on the interstate.love blog with the show notes that come with this episode. I'm just going to talk a little bit about that worksheet. It's about the turnarounds. She uses an example of someone lying. Let's use the name Bob. So let's say that you're upset because Bob lied to me. So the ways that this can be turned around to see it for yourself and to basically bring the projection back to yourself includes, instead of Bob lied to me, I lied to me. I lied to Bob, and Bob didn't lie to me. Bob told me the truth. And you can just replace that person and the action for whatever situation. And the point of doing that is it shows us how whatever situation could potentially be reflecting back to ourselves. Doing this can help you to see, okay, maybe there is some part that, say, I do lie to myself, or I have lied to Bob. Yeah, that has happened. And maybe it's possible that he didn't lie to me. All this does basically is loosens that grip of that interpretation of us wanting to be so right. And so the sooner that we can stop projecting outwardly and start bringing it inwardly, the faster that we get to peace. And so remember that we project the things that we don't want to see within ourselves, and we project that outwards. So whatever it takes for you to be vulnerable with yourself, to see what it is that you don't want to see about yourself, you can use this tool. And remember that it's not about feeling bad or guilty, but actually forgiving whatever you thought was real, whatever you invested so much of your mind in. Lastly, I'm going to talk about another tool that I found useful, and I'm also going to link that on the website. So it's about an app called Spiri, and it's free. You download it and it's super cute, and they have different options for the length of time that you have for dealing with an issue. It allows me to see myself, but it walks me through the process step by step, especially if you do some of the longer ones. It really goes in depth in being able to undo some upset that you've had and that you've been holding on to for a very long time. So I hope that helps somebody. Too much projection. Sometimes this experience of life can just feel like it's too much. Like it's just so much projection all the time. We have over 7 billion mirrors. That seems like a lot. And it can really feel like a lot. And if you've ever been to a house of mirrors or a maze of mirrors, like a really good one, it can get really confusing. I remember I went to one in Switzerland when I was in the middle of an advanced theta healing training, and it was one of the best ones that I'd ever been to. Myself and other people that were in this maze, actually, we just flat out ran into the mirrors more than I'd really like to admit. But it was hilarious to feel so confident that that was the way out, but then you get met by the mirror. Or when I would try to follow somebody, say, with a green shirt, and then I would realize that I was just following their reflection. It's such a perfect metaphor, because when we're on our spiritual journey, it really feels like a house of mirrors, a maze of mirrors, where you're trying to navigate through this maze where you get confused what's the reflection and what's them and what is real. And using this metaphor, we do get confused about our own reflections, other people's reflections, and believing that it's all so real. To recognize that the only real thing and the only real way out is through spirit or God or love or whatever word works for you, to feel that real source and to feel so whole and complete. To me, the path of mastery is really about being able to navigate through this maze of mirrors and to remember what's really real and, have fun along the way. So on that note, thank you so much for joining. Bye for now, and I'll see you next time. Don't forget to log on to the website if you want to find these tools for you or for other people, which is really yourself. Haha. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
I can see a light now, move over. I can see a light now, move over. I can see a light now.
Thanks for listening to Your Interstate on the Interstate.
Not in a rush now.
For more information, visit yourinterstate.love.
In a rush now. It's falling too. The wind on your face now. You're standing in place now. It's all at your pace now. It's calling.